Hey everyone, it's me, Darkness Prevails. The sad news is Nature's Temper will no longer be hosting the show. No drama, just rough times, my friends. Rough times mean lower budgets. I do ask that all of you who enjoyed Nature's Temper's wonderful voice go to his YouTube channel of the same name, Nature's Temper, one word, and subscribe. He's the best storyteller on YouTube. I want to thank him very much for all the hard work and talent he lent to us here at Alone in the Woods. Today's episode features devilish spirits, strange creatures, and 2 stories that I personally have picked for my favorites of 2024. Enjoy, and be sure to send us your scary outdoor stories at eeriecast.com/outdoor. Now, throw a log on the fire, because the night is still young. The Spirit in HogPen Branch, from JoshuaAddams. I grew up in a challenging environment. My mother left my father when I was very young, and we were left in a difficult situation. My father had to work 2 jobs to make enough money to pay our monthly rent, which meant he was rarely home. As a result, from the age of about 8, I was often left on my own, practically raising myself until I eventually left home for college. Luckily, I was granted a scholarship, allowing me to go to college. I spent my college years studying wildlife biology, a lifelong interest of mine. I was always fascinated by the way animals survived and thrived with each other. After years of hard work, I finally earned my master's degree in wildlife. I started to look for available jobs in my area, but I couldn't find anything within 30 miles of my hometown. Eventually, I did find a position. It was in Dallas, Texas. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that I possibly wouldn't have to move out of state if I did land this job. So I sent in my application. The next day, I was asked to have an interview. A few days after that, I took the drive up to Dallas and interviewed with the company. I was offered the job, and I gratefully accepted it. I took the time up in Dallas to look around for homes in the area. I eventually settled on an apartment complex in downtown Dallas. A few months later, I made the move. The apartment was small, but just enough for a man at his bed. I lived my life happily in that apartment for 3 long years before deciding to propose to my girlfriend Sarah. She said yes, and we got married a few months after that. After some time, we moved out of the tiny apartment and bought a small house. Fast forward a few years, and we have 3 beautiful kids, and we're both stressed out. The traffic of the area was too much to be driving in every day, with 3 screaming kids in the back and the house getting cramped. We decided that we couldn't take this lifestyle anymore. We made the executive decision to move somewhere more peaceful. I wanted to keep my job, so we only moved a couple of miles away to the town of Mansfield. It was only about a 20 to 30-minute drive from my office and provided a much more laid-back city experience. We bought a beautiful home in a gated community off of the highway with the help of my wife's parents. The neighborhood was small and maybe had 30 homes inside. All the homes were lovely large houses with pretty large trees in their backyards, perfect for me as a nature enthusiast. We soon moved into the house and our kids fell in love. Our neighbors probably hated it. We never got to know one of our neighbors, but the other neighbors were extremely kind. They were an elderly couple who had never had kids. They eventually became adopted grandparents to our kids and were thought of as family. Like I said, the kids loved the house, and so did my wife and I. The house had 4 bedrooms and a large living room and kitchen. There was also a pool and hot tub in the backyard, which overlooked the creek that went behind our house. The creek was called HogPen Branch, and it ran throughout the town and emptied into Walnut Creek. The river was small and was only about 4 feet deep behind our house. Every once in a while, we would go watch the turtles swim around, and my daughters loved it. A few years passed, and my daughters were finally old enough to be left alone, which meant I had time to finally learn how to golf. Just across the creek was a really nice golf course. After a few weeks of playing, we invested the money to buy a golf cart. It wasn't the fanciest, but it was enough to get you around the course. One night during the summer, my wife decided to take the girls out on a girls' night. Of course, being the 6-year-olds they were, they rubbed it in my face. I went along with it and acted super jealous. However, I was excited to have the house to myself for a night. I eventually decided to go golfing before the sun set. It was probably close to 6 p.m. or so I still had plenty of time. I got ready to leave the house and hopped in my golf cart. In order to get to the greens, you had to drive down the street and go through a little alley nestled between two houses. It was a short drive before you got to the cart path, which had a little bridge running over HogPen branch. This is where I had my first strange encounter. As I was going over the bridge, I heard a splash. With me being the nature lover I am, I jumped out of my cart and leaned over the edge, trying to see what was there. To my surprise, there was nothing. Unlike the creek further upstream, it was fairly clear here. Not anything like the waters of Florida, but I could see the bottom. There was nothing there. Not a fish, not a turtle, nothing. However, I didn't mind it at all. All I could focus on was golf at the time, so I dismissed it as someone skipping stones upstream. I golfed for maybe 2 hours before it got too dark to see the ball. At that point, I packed up my clubs and began to take the drive back home. The pathway was long, taking me a good 5 minutes to drive down. I was starved, and I planned on cooking some burgers for myself later that night. As I drove along the trail, I noticed a few balls someone had forgotten to get out of the sand trap. I needed some more balls, so I went to retrieve them. As I bent over to pick up the golf balls, I heard a loud shriek. I glanced in the direction of the noise and saw nothing, except for trees and the bridge in the distance. I stared in the direction looking for maybe an injured animal. I initially thought it could have been a fox, due to its distinct sound, which is similar to a human scream. Eventually, a thought clicked in my head. I'd thought that there was possibly an animal struggling that could have fallen in the water, back when I'd heard that splash. Though it had been some time since I'd heard the noise, foxes are known to be strong swimmers. Maybe it was still fighting. I jumped in my cart and sped over to the bridge, which was maybe 100 yards away. I was hoping to be able to save this animal's life. However, when I arrived at the bridge, there was nothing there. I searched under it and all around it, but there was nothing. I thought that was odd, but I dismissed it and hopped back into my cart. I drove home and got cleaned up. By the time I'd showered and gotten ready to grill a few patties, it was already dark. I grabbed some meat from the fridge and headed outside. I cleaned off the grill and threw a few patties on. I put on some music too, sitting back and watching the flames turn the red meat brown. I stood up and walked over to flip the patties, but just as I was about to flip the first one, I heard a screech. The sound made me jump. I flipped the patties and walked over to the creek, only to once again find absolutely nothing. At this point, I was getting creeped out. I got my finished patties off the grill and headed back inside. I made my burgers how I liked them and sat down on the dining table. Now that table faced the window, so I was staring out at the backyard, which was only illuminated by the porch lights and the blue hue of the pool's lights. I saw nothing the entire time I ate my burgers, and I sat there in silence. My silence was only broken by the arrival of my family. They came in exhausted from their long night. The kids came over to me, giving me a hug, then went upstairs to get ready for bed. I sat at the table, thinking, I probably look so creepy, as I intensely glared out the window. My thoughts were confirmed when my wife walked up and asked, "What's wrong?" I answered. Not sure. I've been hearing some weird things. Thought it was an animal, maybe a fox or something, but now I'm not so sure. Well, what did it sound like? I mean, it sounded like a fox, which sounds sort of like a person screaming. I went looking for whatever made the sound, but I couldn't find anything. She sort of just looked at me, then replied simply with, "Weird." We sat there for a moment before we heard one of our daughters say, "Dad, why is Mimi in the backyard?" Mimi was our neighbor, who the girls thought of as their grandma. "What?" my wife said quietly. We looked towards the yard. There stood an elderly woman by the creek bed. The lights hardly illuminated her, but from what I could see, it looked like Mimi. I stood up. Sarah said, "Why is she out there?" "I don't know. I better go find out," I said. I threw on my sandals and went to the back door. I opened it and called. "Hello? Mary? Are you okay? Do you need anything?" None of my questions were answered. The woman just stood there, back towards me, staring into the water. As I got closer, I noticed the awful smell coming from the woman. She smelled of stagnant water, very stagnant, to the point it was like rotten eggs in decay. "Mary, do you need something?" My question was never answered. I turned and walked towards the house then. I met my wife in the kitchen. She was still looking out at the woman. "Maybe you should go let Bob know she's out there," she said. "Yeah, good idea. I'll go over. You go tuck the kids in bed and just tell them she was looking for something." She agreed, and I went on over to the neighbor's place. I rang the doorbell and Bob answered the door. He seemed excited that I was over, even though it was so late at night. He told me to come in, asking if I wanted anything. "Want a drink of beer or anything? Mary can get it for you," he said. Mary poked her face from around the corner of the kitchen. "Oh, hey, Mary. What were you looking for outside?" I asked. "Excuse me?" she responded. "I saw you in the backyard a couple minutes ago. Was just wondering if you needed help finding something back there." The couple went silent. Then they looked over at each other. "Sounds to me like you saw her," Bob said. "Yeah, I'm not mad or anything. Just curious if you dropped something in the creek. I can fetch it for you," I said. "No, honey, that wasn't me. But we know exactly who you're talking about. We call her Margaret. See her every now and then," Mary answered. "Wait, so who is she?" I inquired. "Well, that's what we're trying to figure out ourselves. We do know, however, that she's not kind. One time Bob went out to ask her who she was, and she just screamed in his face. He fell over, and when he looked back, she was gone," Mary explained. "Where are the kids?" Bob asked. They're back at the house," I replied. "Oh, you need to go home now," Mary told me. I didn't even question why. I just bolted out the door. I ran to our house, and when I burst in the front door, it was eerily quiet. But one horrifying detail I noticed was that the back door was wide open. I'd forgotten to lock that door. You kind of grow out of the habit of locking doors at night when you live in a gated community that you trust so much. "Sarah!" I called. Nobody answered. I sprinted upstairs to my daughter's room. I found all three girls huddled in the closet crying. My wife was with them. "What happened? Are y'all okay?" I exclaimed. "She's in the house. The lady is in the house. It's not Mary, Josh. It's not Mary," my wife cried to me. "I know," I said, "but it's okay. I'm here now." Just then, I heard a thump from the stairs.
"Josh!"
my wife cried, covering her mouth. At this point, my daughters were sobbing.
"Daddy, is she gonna hurt us?"
my daughter cried. "No, I'm not gonna let that happen," I said confidently. I might have appeared brave to my family, but I was also on the verge of tears. I heard another thump. I wanted to stay in the closet with my family, but as the man of the house, I had to do something. I grabbed my daughter's softball bat, which was leaned against the corner in the closet, and gripped it hard. I slowly walked out of the room, preparing to knock the soul out of whoever was threatening my family. I rounded the corner and looked down the stairs. There, on the third step, was a woman. The woman was staring at me. Her dress was a dark, dirty gray color, and her hair was a dark black and dripping wet. Her eyes were black and her mouth was still. I stood there. I couldn't do anything. After a while, the woman slowly backed down the stairs and walked out of view. Then, after a few more moments, I heard the back door shut. "What the heck?" I said out loud. My mind was racing. Who was that, and why in the world did she come into my house? I had never believed in the paranormal before, but had I just seen a ghost? I then remembered my family who was waiting for me to return. I ran back to that closet and embraced my family. "It's okay. It was just Mimi," I told my daughters. I gave my wife a look, and she went along with my little white lie. We sat there for a moment, before everyone's adrenaline went down and the girls began to become sleepy again. We asked them if they wanted to go sleep at Mimi's and Bob's house that night, and they excitedly said yes. We packed up some small bags, and we were about to walk over to their house. Before we left, I double-checked every single lock in our home. I also made doubly sure that lady was actually gone. She was, but the water droplets she left were not. We ran over to their house quickly, terrified of what we might see outside on the way there. Fortunately, we made it safely. At their place, one of my daughters asked Mary, "What were you doing at our house?" Mary glanced at my wife and I, and we gave her a look, letting her know she should probably join in on the white lie. "I was just looking for sugar. I made cookies. They're in the kitchen," she said sweetly. The girls ran on into the kitchen to get some. "Thank you," I said. "Of course. Is everyone all right? Tell us what happened." We told Bob and Mary the story. They were shook. They'd seen the woman several times before, but they never thought the woman would go inside someone's house. That night, the girls fell asleep quickly in the living room on the floor. However, the four adults could not sleep a wink. We all discussed our experiences, and I told everyone what I saw at the bottom of those stairs. I also told Mary and Bob my experiences from earlier that day. We tried finding information about it online, but there was nothing. The next day, we took a trip to the public library, and we asked if we could go through old documents. We got permission and spent all day going through files and papers. Eventually, my wife found a paper from the year 1907. The article she pointed out reported that a woman was found dead in a creek in town. The article had very little detail and did not specify who the woman was or which creek it was. However, we allowed ourselves to believe this might be the woman who we came in contact with. After that night, we lived in constant fear. My job eventually caused us to move to Georgia, where my wife and I now live. Our daughters are both now in college and have no idea what truly happened that night. As for Bob and Mary, they lived in that house up until a year back. Now they live in a much newer place in a different city. They told us they saw Margaret a couple of times since the incident, We can only hope that the woman is at rest now and will not terrorize anyone else who lives along that creek. I still have questions, though. Like, why did the woman need to open the door if she was a spirit? How did she leave physical water droplets on the floor if she was a ghost? Maybe this wasn't a ghost at all, and was just some jerk teenagers pulling a prank. If you have any idea, any feedback at all, feel free to let us know. Loonies Bridge, from TheCreepNextDoor. Folklore is a curious thing. Tales passed down through generations. Stories that have defied the passage of time. Why do some stories fade with the embers of the campfire, while others burn on forever? I believe that for a story to become folklore, it has to have a universal lesson, and above all, truth. Sure, some of the story becomes embellished, like a game of telephone, but the message remains the same, and the truth is somewhere between the dramatic pauses and jump scares. We as listeners can feel that truth, the belief that the storyteller has in what they're saying, and that sticks with us. It follows us home and demands us to retell the story. There's something about saying it out loud that makes it lighter, makes it a little less believable. But we know better. I'd like to share with you a folktale from my neck of the woods, and the night it became real for me. My grandfather used to tell us the story on hot summer days as we sat on his porch, watching the sun go down and the night starting to creep in from the woods. Now y'all listen well. This is no mere ghost story, he would always open up with. This is truth, with a little bit of bite to it. Many years ago, there was a family that lived out in these parts that was moving closer to town. They'd been hauling stuff back and forth all day. The father was driving the pickup truck, the brother was riding shotgun, and the daughter, Looney, was in the back with the furniture, keeping it from flying off. Well, as they were going over that bridge just down the way, he would point down the road. We all knew the bridge. Everyone had to cross it to get to town. Something awful happened. The wind caught one of those heavy pieces just right and took it over the side of the truck, taking little Looney right along with it. Poor thing. As she went over, she got swept under the tire of that truck, and it took her head clean off, sending it straight up and over the bridge, down into the black water of the swamp below. Now everyone knows it's bad to bury a body incomplete. The spirit can't rest if it's not all there. So everyone pitched in to help look for her missing head, so the family could bury her whole and little Looney's spirit could rest. But try as everyone did, they never could find her head. To this day, her head has never been found, and it's still out there at the bottom of those murky waters somewhere. They say if you cross Loonies Bridge at night, she'll jump on your car looking for her head, and if you don't hurry up and drive across, she might just take yours. He would always then follow up with the story of his farmhand, Ike. My grandfather would say, Ike had a run-in with Looney's ghost once. Ike, a superstitious type, lived on the other side of Loonies Bridge, and he had to cross it every day to and from my farm. Knowing Ike's fear of crossing the bridge at night and his daily 3-mile walk, I, being fond of the boy, began letting him take the tractor home. It helped Ike cross the bridge faster and eased his nerves. One night, Ike was heading home from the farm, and he was about halfway across Loonies Bridge when the tractor started to putter and grind. Then it came to a jerking stop. It broke down for no good reason. Ike kept trying to start it up, but the tractor was dead. He told me he felt it in the air at first. The air felt charged, like electricity surging all around him. His skin tightened with goosebumps, and his hairs began to prickle up. Then the tractor gave a big bounce up and down as if something huge had jumped on it. Ike then felt what he described as hundreds of spider webs falling around his neck, slithering and crawling up towards his face. That's when he smelled it. The dank, rotten smell of swamp mud. As the sensation spread across his cheeks, his vision started to blur, as if lines of something were starting to cover his eyes. He jumped up off the tractor and ran as fast as he could to cover the remaining distance of the bridge. When he reached the end, he turned and saw the tractor bounce up and down again, as if something had jumped off it. Ike quit his job at my farm the next day, and I had to go get the tractor left on the bridge because he wouldn't even go back out there in the daylight. I used to love that story. I would beg him to tell it to me over and over again. I must have heard it hundreds of times. Eventually, my childhood fear of the ghost girl and her bridge got lost in the familiarity, and the legend became mundane for me. That was until the legend showed me just how real it was. Fast forward a few years. As a teenager, I would sneak out of the house in the middle of the night, take my golf cart to steal road signs. My buddy had a boys' cave in the loft of his dad's old barn, where we kids would hang out. We decorated the place with all the signs we took. One afternoon, as summer vacation was nearing its end, we were all hanging out in the loft when my friends got a great idea. We should take one of the signs from Loonies Bridge. Now that would be sick, one of them followed up. I shared glances with them, but didn't answer. Come on, you have to do it, my friend urged. After all, you live the closest, another chimed in. It's literally a stone's throw away from your house. Right? You'll be in and out quick, someone added. Just make sure Looney doesn't catch you, he mocked as he pulled his shirt above his head and stretched his arms out towards my face. They all started to snicker. Now, I wasn't afraid of that bridge, but there was something that just felt icky about it. Going out there in the middle of the night was one thing, but to vandalize it seemed like begging for trouble. Still, I knew I couldn't back down, or else they would never let me hear the end of it. Sure thing, I shot back with a smirk, and so it was decided. I was going to go to Loonies Bridge, and I wouldn't come back empty-handed. It was late. The night was hot. The air was sticky as I crawled out of my bedroom window with my bag of tools. I made my way to the backyard, unplugged the golf cart. Then I was off. As I raced down the road towards the bridge, the air rushing past my face helped me tolerate the thick, muggy night. As I approached the bridge, the darkness pressed in on all sides, and I could see my headlights bouncing off the vibrant yellow stripes of my prize. The sign was the kind with alternating black and yellow stripes that marked the entrances and exits of bridges. I started closing in on Loonies Bridge, but my golf cart started to act up, picking up speed before slowing to a crawl. The headlights dimmed and flickered. Then the cart came to a jerking stop at the entrance of the bridge, plunging me into complete darkness. Crap, I muttered. The battery must be dead, but that didn't make sense. It had been on the charger before I took it out, and I had barely been riding it. I kept trying to start it, but nothing. I turned the key, pushing the pedal, but there was no response. The lights wouldn't work either. Then suddenly, the lights on the golf cart started to flash on and off by themselves. They would flicker on, illuminating the length of the bridge with the bright yellow sign reflecting the light back at me, blinding me. And then whoosh back off, throwing me right back into darkness. I felt it in the air, like electricity or static. Then I heard it, the sound of water. Not splashing, but like something was moving around in the swamp below, followed by the trickle of water droplets. Whoosh, the lights kicked on again, lighting up the bridge. Except this time, the bridge was not empty. In the middle of the bridge lay a blonde, yellowish blob of something that I couldn't quite make out at first. Though unconsciously, I think I knew what it was before my mind could even accept it. It was a thick pile of blonde hair. My heart raced, my chest tightened as that yellow blob started to move. Pieces of hair began to arch from the ground one strand at a time, like static charged threads. Slowly, the strands continued to rise from the road, stretching up towards the sky. At first, they lifted individually, then in clumps, until what had been a matted pile of hair revealed a portion of a face and a single open eye staring back at me. Whoosh! The lights went out again, and darkness swallowed me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel that it could see me. It was watching me from that black expanse. I frantically tried to start the golf cart, slamming the key from off to on, off to on, off to on, constantly pumping the pedal. I only stopped when I began to hear the sound of something dragging across the pavement just ahead of me. It wasn't constant. It came in waves. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause, scrape. Each dragging crunch grew louder and closer. I was hyperventilating. I felt like I was choking on the air. I kept trying to start the golf cart, and finally, it worked. The lights kicked on, and the cart jolted forward with a slam of the pedal. I clicked the switch into reverse, swung it around, and heard a splash as I peeled away from Loonies Bridge. Now grown with kids of my own, I often get asked to tell that story. And on cold nights around the campfire, I always oblige. There's something about telling a story that makes it seem less real. Maybe it's the company of the listeners, the giggles of relief when the story's over, or the way they ask, "Is it real?" before bed, and I reply, "No, it's just a story. Now go to sleep." Perhaps that's what makes a story become folklore, a tale that insists on being shared, hiding the truth in the disbelief of the listener, hoping to share in that disbelief with them. But we, the storytellers, know better, and so do the listeners. We all know ghost stories only have a little bite when they have teeth. Werewolf in the Woods, from It's Loki 445. This happened back in July of 2022. I was in the Boy Scouts back then, living in southern Italy, where this creepy encounter took place. It was a summer night, and I was out with my scout group. A little thing about me, I like to smoke. So every night when we ended our scout activities and finished enjoying the campfire, with games and singing songs, I always went alone to smoke in solitude. However, on that particular night, after the fire and other activities came to an end, I went into the woods nearby our campsite to smoke. Everything was amazing. The sounds of the woods, the gentle breeze of the summer night, the birds chirping in the distance. I was sitting near a tree smoking my cigarette and scrolling through TikTok and Instagram to pass the time. About 25 meters or so in the distance, there was a group of deer just minding their own business. I looked at them eating grass in complete silence, as I didn't want to scare them. It felt nice to have some company. I enjoyed it for at least half an hour when suddenly, the noises of the night began to die down. The night birds just stopped chirping. Critters stopped moving about the underbrush or through the branches. At one point, I looked up, and I saw that the deer weren't even eating anymore. Instead, they were just looking nervously around the area, as if they were expecting something to come out of the darkness. Then it all happened at once. First, I heard a howl, a long screaming howl that sounded like a mix between a man and a wolf. There are no wolves in this area where our camp was, so I instantly knew something was wrong. Being an outdoor boy since I was 10, I knew that the sudden silence in the woods meant only one thing: a big predator nearby. So I stayed as silent as I could, and as motionless. Suddenly, the howl came again. It was louder, closer. That was when the deer just took off, scared by whatever was making this noise. At last, there I was, 100 meters deep in the woods, alone with some unseen predator. I began to hear rustling in the bushes right in front of me. I'd say maybe only 30 meters away. Then I saw two eyes appear in those bushes. Two bright amber yellow eyes, looking directly in my direction, just like they were staring into my soul. Needless to say, I was completely frozen in fear, cold sweat running down the back of my neck. I was shaking like a baby. At first, the thing's eyes were about 1.5 meters from the ground. It began to come out of the bushes, keeping its eyes on me, and all I could do was stare back at it. It was a full moon that night. I noticed this because when it came out of those bushes, it stood up on its hind legs, and I could see it properly. Its height must have been at least a couple of meters, maybe even more. It had long legs, bent backwards or weird, almost dog-like. But the rest was wrong. Long upper arms ending in clawed hands. Not paws, but hands. It was covered in thick, dark fur, with some red shades. I could see its muscles. And the head. God, that head. It was like a canine with a long snout, but even longer than a wolf's. Pointed ears. Those eyes. They had an almost human look in them. At the sight of that thing, which today, after looking at pictures and hearing other stories, I can only say was a werewolf, I stood up slowly. I didn't want it to think I was a threat, or that I was prey, which it would think that if I tried to run. I began walking backwards slowly, back in the direction of my campsite, and it did the same towards me, baring its teeth. I knew it was preparing to lunge, and I was ready to turn and run as fast as I could. It roared then, and clawed at a tree nearby as it moved closer. It was about 10 meters away from me when I heard a noise like an animal running. Out of nowhere came a deer. The deer looked at me, then to the werewolf, and sprinted away into the forest. However, that creature must have thought that the deer was easier prey, because it looked in the direction where the deer ran, then to me. It howled at the sky, went on all fours, and sprinted in the direction of the deer. After a couple of minutes, when the woods came back to life, I started running back to my campsite, absolutely shocked. I continued shaking, and when I managed to get back to the camp, all my friends asked if I was okay. They told me I was pale and covered in sweat. I told them not to worry about me, that I was just fine. That night, when I got into my tent, I did not sleep. I just couldn't. I spent the entire night watching the roof of my tent, hearing something howl in the distance, jumping at every sound that came from outside the tent. I got out of the scouts after that, and I haven't gone back in the woods. Every night, I have nightmares of that creature stalking me through the trees. This was my encounter. I recommend all of you stay safe. Stay aware whenever you're out in the woods. You don't know what could possibly lurk in the shadows, ready to strike. So be cautious. You may not be as lucky as I was to be saved by some casual deer running around at the right moment. The Not Deer of Washington. from Madam Madman. It all started when my cousins had come to visit from Nevada to Washington for a wedding. 3 days after that wedding, we'd gone to a beach near the coast to hang out. We spent a couple of hours paddleboarding, catching fish, talking with relatives, and eating watermelons on the warm beach sand. Once the sun started to set, this was in Washington, so the sun stays out until 9, we had packed up all our things and wanted to show our cousins the abandoned military fort. It was a very interesting place. The fort was in a C shape with rooms along the side of it, with a large dark hallway connecting each side of the C. The base was built into a hill, and you could walk up on top of the base and look down over the edge. My cousins and I were still on the ground with our aunt, whom I'll call Kay. "Hey kids, we can go and walk on top of the base. Want to go?" she asked. We all were ecstatic at the idea of going on top of the base, except for me. I'd been there multiple times. We went on up. Now the base had a smooth grassy top that tapered into woods on the rest of the hill. My aunt and cousins had unknowingly gone back down to the ground, and I was there alone. I stupidly decided not to go back the way I came, like my relatives. Instead, I wanted to go all the way around the flat surface of the base. I was around halfway to the other end when I felt uneasy. I've heard that when you truly know you're in danger, your heartbeat will feel faster. I felt my chest, and my heart was pounding. I realized then that the usual barn swallows that live in the base had gone quiet. Had they left? I looked around, and in the woodline I saw a deer. It was just staring at me. I sighed in relief, but that feeling did not go away. As I looked closer, I noticed that the deer had these terrible forward-facing eyes. It looked wrong. I froze. I was not only an animal fanatic, but a cryptid fanatic too. I knew about plenty of dangerous animals for a 13-year-old. And the way this deer's eyes looked, they were not natural. They were predatory. I didn't know what to do. I felt I needed to escape, obviously, and for some reason, my mind shot to some show where the characters had to watch a magpie to stop it from attacking them when they weren't looking. So I set my eyes on that deer and didn't take them off of it. As I walked backwards, the deer's neck had turned completely unnaturally in a circle, the same ungodly eyes beaming back at me. I started to panic. "Okay, when you get to the hill slope, you're going to run as fast as you can. You can do this," I thought. The deer was still looking at me in the same unnaturally bent position. I couldn't take the panic and dread, so I ran. All my time in track finally paid off, I guess. I ran from the base to the parking lot in what felt like mere seconds. "Hey, what's wrong?" asked Kay and my mom. I told them everything and that we had to leave. Once we were home, I told my other aunts and my mom and dad. One of my aunts, who I'll call B, chimed in and asked if it was a flesh gate or a crawler. But all I said was it was a really messed up deer, with weird eyes and an all too flexible neck. Another aunt, C, said it might have been a knot deer. I'm still not sure if it was a knot deer, or a skinwalker, or the most actually messed up deer in all of existence, but I'm glad it didn't chase me or attempt to attack me when I ran down the hill. American Hellhound Encounter from Cryptid Fanatic. I should start this story off by saying I do not consider myself a religious person. In fact, I actually consider myself agnostic. That being said, I 100% believe in ghosts, demons, or anything paranormal. And I've even had my own experiences with demons in the past. To give a little context, I'm a 27-year-old male from a small town in southwest Indiana of about 238 people, though where I was actually born was about 60,000 people. I live out in the middle of BFE nowhere with my 74-year-old grandmother, and I've been here for the past few years after a particularly nasty divorce. Anyway, there are neighbors only about 40 yards down the road from me, but it's relatively quiet out there. My house is an older home built at the turn of the 20th century, but it has been updated with motion-activated porch lights and other modern equipment. Down both sides of my road, there's literally nothing but cornfields and wooded areas, so you can pretty much guess how quiet it is out there. This encounter happened one winter night when I was the only one in the house awake. I work the night shift at my job, so a healthy sleep schedule is all but non-existent for me. It's not unusual for me to be up at all hours of the night. I was lounging on the couch, playing on my phone during a pretty decent snowfall. We didn't have internet at the time, so I spent my time going through Facebook Marketplace, as I tended to do whenever I wanted to buy a new project car to work on. I look up from my phone and I see the biggest white-tailed buck I've ever seen in my life. Had to be at least 250 pounds, if not bigger. So, fascinated, I sat and watched this buck walk around and graze for a while. Everything was calm, when out of nowhere, a huge black furry mass leapt out from God knows where and tackled this deer to the ground. There was a struggle for about 10 to 15 seconds before the buck stopped struggling and went limp. And I finally get as good of a look as I could through the snowfall. The only way I could describe this thing was it looked like a big black wolf. Now, wolves originally were native to Indiana, but were all but wiped out in the wild during the 19th century due to habitat loss and industrialization, so we don't see them around here anymore. That being said, coyotes are still a very common sight around here, but they usually hunt in packs. This thing was alone. Once the deer was dead, the creature began to settle down and stood back up on all fours. I couldn't believe the size of the thing. Keep in mind, I'm on the shorter side for a guy, standing at about 5'6" and weighing 198 pounds. This thing had to have been 5 feet even at the shoulders on all fours. Its pitch black fur made it hard to pick out any distinguishable details, but not impossible, thanks to the full moon that was out that night. I can't recall what the exact time was, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was about 12:30 a.m. to 1 in the morning. I remember letting out a gasp when I saw the creature leap out of the dark and take down that deer, like it was nothing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I could only watch as a wave of terror washed over me, my eyes firmly locked on it as it began to carry the buck away in its jaws. Its teeth were abnormally large, easily 4 or 5 inches in length, and I could barely make out small definitions of muscles underneath its fur. As it began to carry its next meal away, I saw its eyes. They practically glowed in the dark, as red as the embers of a fresh bonfire. They stared directly at me, while all I could do was watch, all while my heart hammered in my ears and my hands shook violently. I could feel my breath pick up pace as I watched this dog-like creature carry an enormous buck into one of the tall trees across the road. And just like that, it disappeared. I didn't see it the rest of the night. The only thing I could do after that was try my best to get some sleep. Wish I could say that was the last time I saw it, because it wasn't. I woke up the following morning, still trying to wrap my mind around what I saw, or if I had hallucinated the whole thing. Once I got some breakfast, I got dressed. Then I went outside to see if I could find any details or traces of it to convince me it was all real. There were no paw prints, no blood, no signs of a struggle thanks to the snow having covered up the evidence of the previous morning. I was starting to think maybe it had all been a dream, until I looked up in the tree line, and all I see is the buck, or what was left of it. Whatever had attacked it last night had nearly eaten the entire animal, leaving only the skull and spine sitting nearly 30 to 40 feet high in the branches of the now blood-soaked tree. I was terrified. I quickly gathered myself and went about my day. I thought that would be the end of it. Until about 2 weeks later. As I said before, it wasn't unusual for me to be up at all hours of the night. As I type this story, it's about 3:15 a.m. right now where I live. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. I've slept through earthquakes, hurricanes, literal bombs going off, you name it. With that being said, I was actually asleep this time. I'm not entirely sure what the exact time was, but I had gone to bed at around 11 p.m., which for me is early. I was suddenly awakened from a deep sleep with this sense of overwhelming dread coursing through my body. The porch light had been triggered on. Everything within me was telling me not to get off the couch where I slept, to just lay there and try to go back to sleep. However, I felt the intense urge to investigate what was making me feel this way, as one normally does. With the blanket still over my body, I pick up my head and look out the window. I should say the same window where I saw this thing the first time. And there it was again, except this time, it was staring directly at me. We locked eyes for some time. The second I saw those burning red eyes staring into me, my blood ran cold. Fear gripped me like a vice, and I could not speak. I couldn't even scream or call for help. The only sound I could make when I saw that creature was a half-gasp, half-sob as I felt the urge to cry in fear. My first instinct was to cower under the covers like a little kid. Childish, I know, but at the time, I wasn't sure what else to do. I waited for several minutes, praying to God, if he existed, that this beast would not break into my home and make me its next victim. I could hear it walking around the front porch for several minutes, long claws clacking against the cement as it paced back and forth. And then it screamed. The sound this thing made was the most eerie and horrifying screech that chilled me to the bone and made me want to throw up. It sounded like an old steam engine train whistle mixed with a wolf howl, if you can imagine that. I could never even hope to try and replicate that awful noise. Finally, after several long minutes, the sounds all died down and the motion lights shut back off, making me breathe a sigh of relief. As I said before, I'm not a very religious person. In fact, I'm probably the least religious person in my family of Christians. That being said, I'm still not entirely sure what it was that I saw those nights. But after the second encounter, I did a little reading, and everything I saw points to it being a possible hellhound. Unfortunately, hellhound sightings are exceedingly rare around these parts, but stories of these creatures date back to the 1600s in Connecticut. For those who don't know, a hellhound is a creature said to be the guardian of the underworld, like Cerberus from Greek mythology, who himself is said to be a large three-headed black dog who guards the gates to Hades and swallows the souls of the damned. Other folklore describes them as an omen of death, like the ones cited in Connecticut or the surrounding states, with the popular saying that goes, "If you meet the black dog once, it shall be for joy. If twice, it shall be for sorrow. And the third time shall bring death." Now, I don't know about anyone else, but I've seen this thing a total of 4 times, and each time I've never once felt joy, sadness, or any other emotion besides pure primal fear. Thankfully, I've not spotted it in several months. I hope to keep it that way. I don't think shooting it will do anything but tee it off, so I can only pray to God, if he exists, that this thing isn't hungry enough to commit breaking and entering for its next meal. My experience on Glastonbury. From Silver Bullet 54. I want to start by saying that I don't want anyone to press their luck in this area. It just isn't right at all, and very strange. Glastonbury Mountain in Bennington County, Vermont, sounds like a normal place to go hiking, horseback riding, and cycling. However, the mountain is not a normal place. There have been so many horrifying stories coming from there that some people believe it's simply cursed. To be honest, a lot of terrifying things have happened. A strange creature attacked a carriage in the 18th century. Multiple hikers have disappeared and only turned up in an area that had already been searched. There have also been stories of ghostly children, a red-haired hitchhiker, unearthly sounds, and roaring from a secluded area. The most terrifying story concerns a man who vanished from a bus bound for Bennington. He was on the last stop before it, but when the bus arrived, he was gone. There may be something going on there. Native Americans never went to that peak except to bury their dead. I even had my own scary experience there in 2011. Let me start by saying I'm always prepared with a map, compass, food, drinks, and anything else I might need, including a whistle in case I ever get lost. When I stepped foot into Glastonbury Mountain and started my hike, a mist rolled in, and I was hoping it wouldn't rain or storm. It was pretty normal at first, but I soon became aware that everything was muffled. My footsteps made it sound like I was walking through mud. I could barely hear the chirping of a cardinal, and even the buzzing of a fly nearby was almost silent. I eventually came across a shredded t-shirt that looked as if someone had taken a hacksaw to it. I remembered the story then of the Glastonbury monster and shivered. But I manned up and I kept going. I eventually realized the mist obscured everything, so I had no idea where I was. When I looked down, I found shoe prints, a size 10.5 Nike it looked like, which is what I was wearing. I then saw muddy footprints going forward and coming up to the spot where I was standing. I'd somehow gone in a complete circle. I blew my whistle, hoping for a call and response, but I was met by silence. I tried to find my way out, but no matter what path I took, I kept ending up in the exact same spot. It made no sense. I was also aware of a sound of crunching leaves, like someone else was there. I swear I saw a man in a plaid shirt come through the mist, but he vanished almost as quickly as he appeared. Before long, I noticed something different, a strange rock I hadn't noticed before. There was something carved into it, the words, "Man-Eater," and an arrow pointing at the rock. Perhaps an odd joke, but still, I was not going to try and find out what that meant. I kept walking. I came across a pair of sunglasses with cracked lenses. I was starting to wonder if I was about to be like them, whoever had lost these. Abandoned, lost, and forgotten among the trees. I resorted to my compass, but the arrow kept going wonky. Maybe some magnetic issues. So I was blind, lost, turned around, and extremely confused. I blew the whistle again, but heard nothing. I tried calling the ranger's office, but no reception, obviously. I was so frustrated and ready to give up when a man in a blue rain slicker emerged from the mist. He asked if he could help at all, and I told him that I was completely lost. He replied, "No worries, I've been here forever. If you passed the man-eating rock, go west or north and you'll be out. East or south will just get you even more lost." I thanked him for the advice and calmly went north, and as I did, the mist began to clear, and I could finally see where I was going. I made it back to where I started and looked at my watch. 2:22, and I'd started my hike at 2 o'clock. There's no way I was only there for 22 minutes. But maybe I was. Maybe I let my imagination dictate my logic after that experience. But I still wonder if I was in a sort of glitch in the matrix situation. I don't really know exactly what happened that day on the mountain, but I vow to never return. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Outdoor Terrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. For more scary stories from me, catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X or Twitter at Prevails, and if you don't mind, leave a rating for Outdoor Terrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again.